The man assured his son that the thing he had seen was simply a nightmare, and tucked him back into bed. As he made his way down the hall, he was startled to hear a knocking noise coming from an unoccupied bedroom. Well, good evening to all of my fellow tinfoil hats. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we are going to be discussing an absolutely fascinating case, that of the South Middleton anomaly mania. Now, I'll be honest, this is kind of a long trip, so please keep your hands and feet in the saucer and enjoy the ride. Now, this case centers on a family who, due to their wish for anonymity, actually got me extremely turned around when I was starting to investigate this case. Most publications gave them the pseudonym of the Goulds, which one of the original investigators then decided to rechristen them the Labelles in his publication. So I'm going with Goulds because it sounds really close to ghouls. And speaking of ghouls, in looking over some of the photos, it's kind of funny. Like, their house definitely looks like it was a Dutch colonial revival house, the same style as the infamous Amityville horror house, that distinctive gambrel roof that, of course, I can't even think of that term without thinking of Lovecraft's ghoul-haunted Arkham. Anyway, now this case occurred over a very long period of time in the area of South Middleton, Massachusetts, about 15 miles north of Boston. This case is truly of some significance because it involves a really long history of sightings by different family members, again, over this long period of time. So the Gould family included 50-year-old Teresa, 52-year-old Thomas, and their three children, 21-year-old Alan, 20-year-old Nancy, and 14-year-old Douglas. Again, these are all pseudonyms. So, prior to being a self-employed carpenter, Thomas worked as a medic for the Royal Canadian Air Force for 4 years. And apparently, Teresa and I'm assuming the family lived in her parents' home, which was in the same area in question. It actually comes up in the story I'm about to relate, before moving into the home which she and Thomas built. Now, the first occurrence of anything strange was reported to investigators David Webb, yes, of 1973 Year of the Humanoids fame, and Raymond Fowler. And it was reported 19 years after it occurred, when they had been called in because of kind of the heightening activity that was going on in the area. So when they asked the family, what was the first thing that you remember experiencing that was outside of the normal, the grandmother stated that in May or June of 1962, she spotted something strange after a thunderstorm. After midnight, she said that she saw this brilliant round light, which increased in size before splitting. She said that it had multicolored rays of light which came out from behind the object, and she watched it for about 5 minutes. Now, this would not be the only light phenomenon spotted by the family. Sometime in 1974, Alan claimed to be awakened by a bright light coming in through the heavy curtains of his bedroom, and this was around 10:30 or 11 at night. Upon looking out, he saw that it was caused by this yellowy, orangish red object behind the outdoor pool. He saw that it had a slightly undefined cigar shape and rose straight up into the air and out of sight. Now, although most of this activity occurred in the residences or properties owned by the Gould family, also in 1974 in summer, the five Goulds were on vacation in Coleman State Park in Colebrook, New Hampshire. Allen gave a detailed report that most of the family claimed to have seen a huge dark object with lights on it, which changed from white to red, take off from a mountaintop. However, the familial phenomenon was not relegated to lights in the sky. No, the family was also beset by strange prowlers. One such example occurred in June of 1977 around 9 p.m. The grandmother was walking from her home to the Gould house, anticipating seeing her grandson Douglas waiting for her on the porch. As she approached and she saw him on the porch, she noticed a person standing about 6 feet off to her right, dressed in dark pants, a white shirt, and with dark hair, standing about 5'7". She said that the figure stood absolutely motionless and with its back to her. She figured that it was her son-in-law, so she called out a quick hello to Douglas, turned her attention to him for like a second, turned back to greet, again, her son-in-law Thomas, and in that brief moment, the figure had absolutely vanished. Now, apparently, these sightings of so-called prowlers were so prevalent that the Middleton police were called several times to try and track down a trespasser. However, they never found anything. Throughout the many times that the prowler was seen, however, no facial features were ever observed. They also had a strange method of movement, extremely rigid, and the limbs never seemed to bend. When this being turned, they claimed that it seemed as though the whole body kind of rotated as one. Nancy is quoted as saying that she once saw him turn his body without moving his feet. This prowler was always dressed in a white shirt and dark pants, often appearing among the trees and always walking back into the forest. However, they also claimed that on several occasions they would see several figures dancing on the hill behind their home. Also, even in the presence of snow, neither the prowler or the other various humanoids that these people claimed to have seen ever left footprints. A teenage niece of the Gould family also claimed that cattle mutilations had joined the cornucopia of creepiness. She lived nearby in a place known as the Blay Ranch. In fall of 1977, she claimed that two calves went missing from the herd. In a few days, she found them mutilated, decapitated, the classics, in a purported ancient burial ground and near a gravel pit. Later, in mid November of 1977, Douglas was outside playing by burning plastic toy cars. Don't ask me, I guess that's fun. When he heard footfalls nearby, he looked towards the sound of footsteps and saw an all white being walking stiffly. He said that it went behind a shed and Douglas ran to get his father. Tom came back to the area and saw the strange being standing near a car. He went up to it, reached out to touch it, and when his hand was about to make contact with his shoulder, the thing simply vanished into thin air. On January 9th of 1978, the youngest boy, Douglas, was staying with relatives while everyone else in the family was home. 20-year-old Nancy and her mother, Teresa, were sitting in the living room around 7:30 in the evening when through the dining room window they saw a large yellow-white light. Teresa believed it to be three round lights, and Nancy described it as a yellow-orange ball of light approaching their vicinity. Nancy ran outside just in time to see it disappear behind the trees, and when she said disappear, she meant disappear. There was no residual glow or anything. As soon as it went behind the trees, she said it just kind of blinked out. Nancy went to phone a friend, and then when she tried to call someone else about 5 minutes later, the phone was dead and remained so for 20 minutes. A relative also tried to call the Goulds at this time, but guess what? They couldn't get through. The line was dead. Now, perhaps the relative was trying to call because of what was going on in their home where Douglas Gould was staying. At approximately the same time of the sighting, they had just put all of the kids in the house to bed when one of their children called out, saying that there was a man in the room and he was trying to touch them. Now, apparently, the kid had seen a white figure at the foot of his bed. Now, the dad, assuming that he was dreaming, just told him to go back to sleep. As he left the room, he heard something in the other, unoccupied bedroom, a knock. When he went to see what it was, he went in the room and then heard a knock at that window. Now, I will play the skeptic. I'll pull a Scully here and say that apparently it was a very windy night. You know how that goes. But wind can't quite explain what happened next. The dad pulled the curtain back and saw a figure standing on top of the back porch roof. He claimed that the figure was wearing a white suit and a mask-like hood, which was gray, and punctuated only by a pair of eyes. Now, the dad immediately ran downstairs and out the door. Upon turning around to go back inside, he didn't see the thing anywhere. He was just going to go back in for the night. He saw, apparently, the same exact figure standing right outside the door. How this encounter terminated, I would love to know. The next day, Tom Gould was chopping wood around 2:30 p.m. when he spotted, you're not going to believe this, a white-suited figure standing about 90 feet away on a little path beside a tree. Now, this was not the first time he had seen this figure. He had seen it several weeks before, in December of 1977, and over the course of the investigation, claimed to see it about 7 times. He said that this figure stood about 4.5 feet tall with broad shoulders, and as he described them, 3-digit mittens and a square helmet, both of battleship gray with 2 dark eyes or eye holes. Now, spookily enough, he claimed that each time he'd seen this thing, he felt as though there was a second one nearby that he couldn't see. On this occasion, Tom called out to it in English and received no response. He then called out to it in French and thought that it moved slightly. Now, apparently, Tom was by this point just so used to these creepy little dudes that each time, he tried to give chase, he said that it was futile, they would just vanish into the woods. He just didn't even give it the time of day. He just went on chopping wood for another hour and a half, checking to see that his little white-suited friend was still there every once in a while. Tom eventually finished his work and got into his truck, keeping a lookout for the little dude, who apparently had fled the scene by this time. Maybe he got sick of watching Tom chop wood. Who knows? However, Tom did find something else of note, a giant object which at first looked to him like a boulder. He stopped his truck and walked towards the strange object, which he said was egg-shaped, gray, and rough, measuring about 40 by 13 feet. Now, if you're asking, oh, you noticed a big rock, that is a very large rock. That is truly a boulder. So I can see why he would be like, hey, I don't remember that boulder being there. I can understand why he would stop to take a look at it. Now, he said that it was covered in little windows, which he said looked like, quote, a frog's eye, and were each covered in something like a hood. Nancy would later report seeing a very similar craft, if not the same one, referring to the windows as bubble-shaped. Apparently, this landed boulder craft thing stuck around for about 2 full days, though eventually Allen reported seeing a disc ascend from the property, and lo and behold, when they went to check on it again, the landed craft with the bubbly windows was gone. However, where it had been were small holes in the ground. In February of 1978, the phenomena apparently visited the Campbell house. Now, as to if this is the grandmother, I'm honestly not entirely sure, but whoever the Campbells were, it seems like they were having one heck of a time. They apparently were beset by poltergeist activity, which included locks being broken, locked doors opening by themselves, and a sound like a swarm of bees, afflicting one particular member of the family so badly that he had to sit down. The phenomena was so prevalent that they actually shoved knives into the door jambs to keep the doors from opening on their own. This apparently worked for a time. One night, as the family was gathered in one room, several of the doors pushed open and the knives went scattering across the floor. April of 1978 also found another escalation in the disturbances. One night around 9 o'clock, Nancy was sitting on her bed, sewing and singing along to a record that she had on, when she noticed that someone was standing in her doorway. She had left the door open just a crack and noticed that the light was blocked out. She looked and saw what she described as a normal-looking guy standing about 5'7", wearing an unzipped jacket. Thinking it was just her dad, she paid no mind until it was still just standing there. So she reached over and opened the door, and as she did so, the form vanished. The next day, Douglas and a cousin were out riding mini bikes when they took a break and sat down. When they were getting up to leave, they said that they saw large white heads with huge dark eyes sticking up out of the brush. Now, they didn't stick around to find out what they were. Douglas returned later with his brother Alan and 2 other cousins, and they also claimed to see these strange, tall, white entities with black bands on their arms. 10 days later, one of the cousins was playing in the Gould household, and when she looked out the window, they were in the basement, and so this window was like ground level. She claimed that she saw one of these oval-faced, big-eyed beings staring in the window at her. So apparently, by this point, these new, taller, white-suited beings seemed to be all the rage. They kept on showing up. In September of 1978, Alan saw a group of 6 figures standing in front of the house, 5 of which wore white suits and 1 of which was wearing black and pointing. After about 10 minutes, he claimed that the whole line of the creatures simply walked into the woods. Now, sometime after this, the family moved to Maine, and unfortunately, any further attempts to contact them about their experiences was absolutely futile. So, as I said, this case is rather a trip, and occurs over quite a lengthy period of time. For this reason, no doubt, it was included in the chapter entitled Haunted Witnesses in Raymond Fowler's book, Casebook of a UFO Investigator. And I think that Haunted Witnesses really sums it up very well. You have this family living in the same area who just consistently have weird stuff happening. And this stuff is kind of across the board. Of course, given that these early reports were published in places like Flying Saucer Review, it's viewed from the ufological stance. And there is definitely the spacey iconography to back this up. On the UFO side of things, you have the landed craft as well as these big bug-eyed humanoids that some of the kids claim to have seen, as well as the kind of robotic connotation ascribed to the little hooded humanoids. Now, on the flip side, the image of the prowler has a much more spectral connotation. If I had to compile a list of common ghost appearances, some guy with dark pants and a white shirt would definitely be in the running for most common ghost outfit, I guess, ghost fashions, along with the woman in a white dress. However, we have, of course, the strange robotic way that the prowler walked. But on the flip side of that, neither the prowler or the little hooded humanoids or the big bug-eyed humanoids ever left tracks even in snow. And they also had that very neat trick of being able to just vanish into thin air whenever anyone got close. Now, as usual, I won't say always, but I'll say as usual, I think the demarcations between these apparently different types of phenomenon, in this case UFO related or ghost related, are often kind of ineffective. Now, this case does have one of my favorite things to talk about, and that is the folkloric elements. The first thing to stand out is Thomas's insistence that the so-called landed craft at first looked to him like a boulder, and as it sounded like, still looked rather boulder-ish, even upon closer examination. Boulders often mark the homes of the good folk. There is a fantastic case I came across in preparation for this episode from britishfairies.wordpress.com. There will be a link to that in the description because it was so cool. And of course, it will also be included in my works cited page on my free blog at patreon.com. Anyway, this case where a farmer refused to help move two boulders, stating there's rooms down there, that they not only marked the spot where the fairies were, but also were like literally right above them or connected to them somehow. In addition to that, the claim that the family saw on multiple occasions these strange beings dancing on a nearby hillside. I mean, pretty much this takes this to the realm of the Cthulhu mythos. But old ones aside, this is an extremely common pastime of the fairies and has been seen in other modern UFO occupant encounters, such as the Little Spring Creek Singers, which I'll include a link to that video in the description of this one. It's notable, too, that the first thing observed by anyone in the family was light phenomenon. Now, the fact that it was during a storm, of course, raises ball lightning's ugly head. However, as I've said a billion times before, it's like if ball lightning was Bigfoot, they'd be saying there was no body. Ball lightning is still a phenomenon which is hitherto unexplained. So you have this decade and a half long case ushered in by light phenomenon, and light phenomenon continues to kind of punctuate the family's experiences. The most intriguing part of this entire case to me, however, is the infamous sleepover, and one occurrence again that was begun by light phenomenon. Simultaneously, as two family members are witnessing this huge amber ball of light soaring through the sky, in the home where one member of the family, Douglas, is staying, another child claims to see a white figure at the foot of his bed trying to touch him. Now, it would be tempting, of course, to chalk this up to hypnagogia or an overactive imagination. However, it's a little bit more difficult to write off the boy's father seeing a strange white suited figure outside of the window, which seemed truthfully to be taunting him. And again, it's this moment where one member of the family is seeing this strange white suited figure, two members of the family are seeing this light phenomenon, and then in addition to this, the phone line goes down. Um, all of those things could be happening coincidentally. Do I find that almost harder to believe than if they are all wrapped up in some sort of singular anomaly? Yes, I have to admit the coincidence to me seems more far-fetched than if they were all connected. It's cases like these that are just such a puzzle, because it combines the iconography of a UFO sighting with the proximity and repetition of a haunting. And again, it involves this whole family, with occurrences happening habitually across almost a decade and a half, across two properties, appearing to follow one of the family members to a third, and then even on one occurrence, following the whole family down to New Hampshire for vacation. Now, it's reported that the Goulds moved shortly after the investigation, and the investigators unfortunately lost contact. My biggest wonder is whether the phenomenon followed them to their new digs. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Middleton anomaly mania, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. And be sure to check out Somewhere in the Skies for all of the very best in anomalous listening, as well as the home for the audio versions of Just Another Tinfoil Hat every other Friday. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.